The grand doors of Carnegie Hall swung open as the last notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 still echoed in people's minds. It had been one of those magical evenings that reminded everyone why classical music had survived for centuries. The audience filed out slowly, many still humming the melodies they had just heard, their faces glowing with the satisfaction that only comes from witnessing true artistry. But while most people headed home to their warm beds, a special group of guests made their way to the elegant reception hall just behind the main auditorium. These weren't ordinary music lovers. They were the donors, the patrons, the wealthy supporters who kept places like Carnegie Hall alive and thriving. Tonight's reception was their reward for another year of generous contributions. The reception hall itself was a work of art. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, casting warm light across polished marble floors. Tall windows lined one wall, offering a glimpse of the city lights twinkling outside. But the real centerpiece of the room was the magnificent grand piano that sat right in the center, its black surface so perfectly polished that it reflected the chandeliers above like a dark mirror. Dr. Alexander Chun, the evening star performer, moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. At 42, he had already played in every major concert hall in the world. His dark hair was still slightly damp from the intense performance, and his tuxedo jacket hung loosely over his arm as he chatted with the guests who approached him with eager smiles and endless compliments. The conversations were predictable, but necessary. How did he make those difficult passages look so effortless? Where did he find the emotional depth for such a moving performance? Had he always known he wanted to be a pianist? Dr. Chun answered each question with genuine warmth, even though he had heard them all countless times before. These people made his career possible, and he never forgot that the reception hall buzzed with the kind of sophisticated chatter that happens when well-dressed people gather after a cultural event. Wine glasses clinked softly as waiters in white. Jackets moved smoothly through the crowd, offering champagne and small appetizers. Women in elegant evening gowns discussed the finer points of the performance while men in expensive suits debated which movement had been the most technically challenging. Near the back of the room, almost invisible among all the glamour, a woman in her late 40s quietly went about her work. Maria Santos moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of experience, collecting empty glasses and straightening chairs that had been moved during the evening's festivities. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard uniform of the cleaning staff, a navy blue dress that was practical rather than fashionable. Most of the guests didn't even notice her. She had perfected the art of being present but invisible, doing her job without disturbing the important people who filled these halls every night. After 15 years of working at Carnegie Hall, she knew exactly how to move through a crowd without being seen, how to clean without interrupting conversations, how to be helpful without being intrusive. But Maria's eyes often wandered to the grand piano in the center of the room. While others saw it as an expensive piece of furniture or a symbol of cultural sophistication, she saw something different. She saw an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Her fingers sometimes twitched involuntarily when she looked at those keys, muscle memory from a lifetime that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. The evening was winding down, and the crowd was beginning to thin. Some guests had already left, satisfied with their brief encounter with high culture and ready to return to their comfortable lives. Others lingered, reluctant to let go of the magic they had experienced. Dr. Chen was getting ready to leave as well. But first he needed to retrieve something he had left behind. During his pre-performance warm-up, he had placed his personal copy of the sheet music on top of the piano. It was an old, worn copy that had traveled with him around the world, filled with his own notes and markings that helped him remember the subtle interpretations that made his performances special. He never liked to leave it behind, no matter how secure the venue seemed. As he approached the piano, he noticed Maria carefully dusting its surface with a soft cloth. She worked with unusual care, her movements gentle and respectful, as if she understood that this wasn't just furniture but a living, breathing instrument capable of creating magic. Most cleaning staff treated pianos like any other piece of equipment, but there was something different about the way she touched it. The reception hall had grown quieter now, with only about 20 guests remaining. The conversations had become more intimate, the laughter softer. The evening was transitioning from a formal event to a more relaxed gathering of friends who shared a love of music. Dr. Chun could feel the familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. That always followed a successful performance. He watched Maria work for a moment, noticing how her hands seemed to naturally find the curves and angles of the piano's design. There was something almost musical about the way she moved, a rhythm that suggested a deeper connection to the instrument than mere professional duty. When she reached the keyboard area, she paused for just a moment, her cleaning cloth hovering over the keys as if she was reluctant to disturb them. The remaining guests continued their conversations, unaware of the small drama playing out near the piano. They were discussing plans for the next season, debating which performers they were most excited to hear, sharing stories about concerts they had attended in other cities. The wine had loosened tongues and created the kind of warm camaraderie that made these receptions worthwhile for everyone involved. Dr. Chun stepped closer to the piano, and Maria noticed his approach. She immediately stepped back, ready to move out of his way with the practiced deference of someone who knew her place in the social hierarchy of these events. But something about her careful attention to the instrument had caught his interest. In his years of performing, he had developed an instinct for recognizing people who truly understood music, and something about this woman suggested she might be more than she appeared. The lighting in the reception hall had been dimmed slightly. As the evening progressed, creating a more intimate atmosphere, the remaining guests seemed reluctant to leave, drawn together by their shared experience and the lingering effects of the beautiful music they had heard. Outside the tall windows, the city continued its restless movement, but inside this elegant room, time seemed to move more slowly. Dr. Chun reached for his sheet music, but his attention remained on Maria. There was something in her posture, something in the way she had touched the piano, that made him curious. He had spent his entire adult life around musicians and music lovers, and he had developed a sixth sense for recognizing kindred spirits. Call it intuition or professional instinct, but something told him that this quiet woman who cleaned Carnegie Hall after hours might have a story worth hearing. The stage was set for an encounter that none of them could have predicted. A moment that would change everything for everyone involved. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary circumstances, and sometimes the most unexpected people turn out to be the most remarkable of all. Dr. Chun reached across the polished surface of the grand piano, his fingers finding the familiar weight of his sheet music. The pages were worn soft from years of use, filled with penciled notes and markings that only he could decipher. As he picked up the music, he couldn't help but notice how spotless the piano looked. Every surface gleamed under the soft chandelier light, and not a single fingerprint marred the perfect black finish. Maria had stepped back respectfully when she saw him approaching, but she hadn't gone far. She stood quietly nearby, her cleaning cloth folded neatly in her hands, waiting to see if he needed anything before she continued with her work. This was the dance she had perfected over 15 years, being helpful without being intrusive, present but not pushy. Beautiful instrument, isn't it? Dr. Chun said, more to himself than to anyone else. His hand rested gently on the piano's closed lid, feeling the subtle vibrations that still seemed to linger from the evening's performance. Every piano had its own personality, its own voice, and this particular Steinway had been his companion for the evening's journey through Rachmaninoff's emotional landscape. Maria nodded politely but didn't speak. She had learned long ago that most performers didn't really want to have conversations with the cleaning staff. They were usually lost in their own thoughts after a performance, processing the evening's successes and challenges, already thinking ahead to their next concert or rehearsal, but Dr. Chun seemed different tonight. Maybe it was the wine he had sipped during the reception, or maybe it was the lingering, high that came from a particularly good performance, but he found himself wanting to talk. The remaining guests were deep in their own conversations, and something about this quiet woman's careful attention to his instrument had sparked his curiosity. "You know," he said, running his fingers along the piano's edge, "most people just see a piece of furniture when they look at a piano. But you handle it like you understand what it really is?" Maria looked up, surprised that he was speaking directly to her. In all her years working at Carnegie Hall, she had exchanged maybe a dozen words with the performers who graced these stages. They lived in a different world, one of spotlights and applause, while she worked in the shadows when the lights were dim and the audiences had gone home. "I just try to take good care of everything here," she said softly, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent that spoke of a childhood spent somewhere far from these elegant halls. "The instruments deserve respect." Dr. Chun smiled at her response. There was something in the way she said "instruments" that caught his attention. Not furniture or equipment, but instruments. It was a subtle difference, but one that suggested a deeper understanding than he might have expected from someone whose job was simply to keep things clean. The reception hall around them continued to buzz with quiet conversation. A group of elderly donors near the windows were discussing their plans for a music festival in Europe. Two younger couples were debating the merits of different conductors they had heard recently. The wine had created that warm, relaxed atmosphere that made these post-concert gatherings so enjoyable for everyone involved. "Have you worked here long?" Dr. Chun asked, genuinely curious now. He tucked his sheet music under his arm and leaned against the piano, settling in for what he hoped might be an interesting conversation. 15 years this October," Maria replied, a small smile crossing her face at the milestone. "I've seen a lot of wonderful performances in that time. Tonight's was certainly one of the best." "You heard the concert?" Dr. Chun was surprised. Most of the cleaning staff worked during the performances, setting up for receptions or preparing for the next day's events. He hadn't expected that she would have had the opportunity to listen. "I finish my work early when there's a good pianist playing," Maria admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I hope that's okay. I just stand in the back where nobody can see me." There was something endearing about her confession. The way she asked permission for something she had every right to do. Dr. Chun found himself genuinely touched that his music had drawn her to listen. In all his years of performing, he had never really thought about the people who worked behind the scenes, the ones who made these grand venues possible, but rarely got to enjoy what happened on stage. "Of course it's okay," he said warmly. "Music is for everyone." "What did you think of the Rachmaninoff?" Maria's eyes lit up for just a moment before she caught herself and looked down at her cleaning cloth. "It was beautiful. You played the second movement with such feeling. The way you handled the difficult passages in the third movement was—" She paused, as if she had said too much. Dr. Chun stared at her, genuinely surprised. She wasn't just offering polite compliments. She was talking about specific technical aspects of the performance, demonstrating a level of musical knowledge that was completely unexpected. The second movement of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto was indeed known for its emotional depth, and the third movement contained some of the most challenging passages in the entire concerto repertoire. "You know the piece well?" he said, his curiosity now fully awakened. "I've heard it performed many times over the years," Maria said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much but unable to completely hide her knowledge. "Different pianists bring different interpretations to it." The conversation was taking an unexpected turn, and some of the nearby guests had begun to notice. Mrs. Henderson, one of the hall's major donors, glanced over with mild curiosity. She was used to seeing Dr. Chun charm the wealthy patrons, but it was unusual to see him deep in conversation with a member of the cleaning staff. Dr. Chun noticed the attention they were attracting, but instead of feeling embarrassed, he felt a mischievous impulse rising within him. There was clearly more to this woman than met the eye, and the combination of wine, post-performance euphoria, and genuine curiosity was making him bold. "You seem to know quite a bit about piano music," he said, his voice taking on a playful tone that carried just far enough to catch the attention of more guests. Have you ever played yourself? Maria's reaction was immediate and telling. Her hands tightened slightly on the cleaning cloth, and something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. For just a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, and Dr. Chen caught a glimpse of something he hadn't expected to see. "Oh, I couldn't," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I mean, I wouldn't want to ... But Dr. Chen was warming to his theme now, and the slight crowd that was beginning to gather around them only encouraged his playful mood. He gestured toward the magnificent instrument beside them, its keys gleaming invitingly under the chandelier. "Light. Come on," he said with a grin that was both charming and challenging. "You handle that piano like you know how to play it. Why don't you give us a little performance?" The words hung in the air like a musical note waiting to resolve. Around them, conversations began to quiet as people turned to see what was happening. Some smiled at what they assumed was good-natured teasing between the famous pianist and a member of the staff. Others looked mildly uncomfortable, unsure whether this was appropriate behavior for such an elegant gathering, but Dr. Chun was watching Maria's face, and what he saw there made him realize that his playful challenge might have struck closer to home than he had intended. This was clearly not just a cleaning lady who happened to appreciate good music. This was someone with a story, someone with secrets, someone who might be about to surprise them all in ways none of them could imagine. The reception hall seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Chun's playful challenge hung in the air like a question mark, and everyone within earshot had stopped their conversations to see what would happen next. Maria stood frozen, her cleaning cloth clutched in her hands, her eyes moving between the piano and the small crowd that was beginning to form around them. Mrs. Henderson, the elegant woman in pearls who had donated millions to the hall over the years, stepped closer with an amused smile. "Oh, this should be interesting," she whispered to her husband, loud enough for others to hear. She clearly expected Maria to politely decline and hurry away, perhaps with an embarrassed laugh about not knowing the first thing about playing piano. Mr. Thompson, a wealthy businessman who served on the board, chuckled softly and nudged his wife. "Poor woman probably doesn't know what to say," he murmured. "Chun's putting her on the spot." But there was kindness in his voice, not mockery. He was ready to step in if things became too uncomfortable for everyone involved. The younger guests were pulling out their phones, sensing that something unusual was happening. In their world of social media and instant sharing, any unexpected moment was worth capturing. They held their devices ready, expecting either an awkward moment they could laugh about later or perhaps a sweet story about a famous pianist being kind to the working staff. Dr. Chun himself was beginning to wonder if he had gone too far. His post-performance energy and the wine had made him more playful than usual. But looking at Maria's face now, he could see that his casual challenge had hit something deeper than he intended. There was a mix of emotions crossing her features. Surprise, certainly, but also something that looked almost like fear. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his tone gentler now. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It was just a silly joke. You clearly appreciate music, and I thought maybe ... He trailed off, realizing he wasn't sure what he had thought. But Maria wasn't moving away. Instead, she was staring at the piano with an expression that was hard to read. Her breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more deliberate. Her hands had stopped fidgeting with the cleaning cloth and now hung still at her sides. Something was happening inside her, some kind of internal struggle that the watching crowd couldn't understand. "Maria?" Dr. Chen said softly, using her name for the first time. He had read it on her name tag, but somehow speaking it aloud made the moment more personal, more real. She looked up at him then, and he was startled by what he saw in her eyes. It wasn't embarrassment or fear anymore. It was something else entirely, a kind of hunger, maybe, or longing, as if his playful challenge had awakened something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "I haven't played in many years," she said quietly, her voice so soft that the people at the edge of the growing circle had to lean in to hear her. "But if you're serious—" She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her, then back At the piano, I suppose I could try. The reaction was immediate and electric. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. Mr. Thompson stopped smiling and looked more closely at Maria, as if seeing her for the first time. The younger guests exchanged excited glances, their phones now definitely recording. Even Dr. Chun felt a jolt of shock run through him. "Wait, you actually play?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that made several people in the crowd chuckle nervously. Maria nodded slowly, still staring at the piano. "I told you I appreciated the instruments," she said with the faintest hint of a smile. "I may have understated things a little." The circle of observers was growing larger now. Word was spreading through the remaining reception guests that something unexpected was happening near the piano. People who had been ready to leave were setting down their coats and moving closer. The waiters had stopped clearing glasses and were watching from a respectful distance. Dr. Chun looked around at the crowd, then back at Maria. This had started as a light-hearted moment, but it was clearly becoming something more significant. He could feel the energy in the room shifting, the way it did before a performance when anticipation reached a certain level. "Are you sure?" he asked Maria. "You don't have to do anything just because I suggested it. I was only joking around." But Maria was already moving toward the piano bench. Her steps were different now, more purposeful. The quiet, almost invisible woman who had been cleaning glasses a few minutes ago was transforming into someone else. Entirely. Her posture straightened, her movements became more confident, and there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "It's been 25 years, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "But I suppose some things you never really forget. 25 years. The number hit Dr. Chun like a physical blow. Whatever story this woman carried, whatever had kept her away from the piano for 2.5 decades, it was clearly significant. He found himself genuinely curious now, no longer thinking about entertainment for the crowd, but actually wanting to know what was about to happen. Maria reached the piano bench and stood beside it for a moment, her hand resting on its leather surface. The entire reception hall had grown quiet now. Even the conversations happening across the room had died down as people sensed something important was occurring. "What are you going to play?" Dr. Chun asked, his professional curiosity overriding any social awkwardness he might have felt about the situation he had created. Maria looked at the keys, her expression thoughtful. "I used to know a piece by Chopin," she said slowly. "Ballade No. 1, it was always my favorite, though I'm not sure I remember it well enough anymore." If Dr. Chun had been surprised before, he was absolutely stunned now. Chopin's first ballade wasn't a simple piece that someone might have learned casually. It was one of the most challenging works in the piano repertoire, a piece that required not just technical skill but deep musical understanding. It was the kind of piece that serious pianists spent months preparing, that music students worked toward for years. The crowd around them had grown to include nearly everyone remaining at the reception. Mrs. Henderson was whispering urgently to her husband, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. The board members were exchanging meaningful looks. Even the venue staff had gathered at the edges of the room, sensing that their colleague was about to do something remarkable. Maria sat down on the bench and adjusted her position with the kind of automatic precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and Dr. Chun could see her taking deep breaths, preparing herself for whatever was about to happen. The silence in the room was complete. Now, outside, the city continued its endless motion, but inside Carnegie Hall's reception room, time seemed suspended. Everyone was watching this middle-aged woman in a cleaning uniform as she prepared to either embarrass herself terribly or surprise them all beyond imagination. Maria's hands found their position on the keyboard. Her fingers curved naturally over the keys, and for just a moment she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Dr. Chun saw something there that made his breath catch. It was the look of a musician about to make music, the expression he had seen in the mirror countless times before his own performances. The transformation was complete. Whatever was about to happen, one thing was certain: none of them would ever forget this moment. Maria's fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out clear and pure into the hushed reception hall. It was a single G, played with such perfect tone and timing that several people in the crowd actually gasped. This wasn't the hesitant touch of someone who hadn't played in years. This was the confident strike of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Dr. Chun felt his heart skip a beat. That first note told him everything he needed to know about what was coming. In his 20 years of professional performing, he had heard thousands of pianists play that exact opening to Chopin's first ballade. Most of them were good. Many were very good. But this single note carried something special, a depth of understanding. That couldn't be taught, only felt. The second note followed, then the third. Maria's hands moved across the keyboard with a grace that seemed to surprise even her. Her fingers remembered patterns they hadn't traced in decades, finding their way through the complex opening passage as if no time had passed at all. The melody began to unfold, haunting and beautiful, filling the elegant room with sounds that most of these people had only heard from the world's greatest concert halls. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open slightly. She had attended hundreds of classical performances over her 70 years, had heard the most famous pianists of her generation, but she had never experienced anything quite like this. There was something raw and honest about Maria's playing. That made it different from even the most polished professional performances. It was as if the music was coming from somewhere deep inside her, a place where it had been waiting patiently for 25 years. The young guests with their phones were no longer thinking about social media. They stood transfixed, their devices forgotten in their hands, completely absorbed by what they were witnessing. The music seemed to reach into each person and touch something they hadn't expected to feel at a fancy reception. This wasn't background entertainment anymore. This was art happening right in front of them. Maria's technique was flawless. Her left hand provided the perfect foundation of bass notes while her right hand danced through the intricate melody lines. That made Chopin's ballades so challenging and so beloved. The difficult runs that had challenged Dr. Chun during his own student years flowed from her fingers like water, each note perfectly placed and timed, but it wasn't just the technical perfection that was stunning everyone into silence. It was the emotion behind every phrase. Maria played as if she was telling a story that she had lived, not just learned. Each musical sentence carried weight and meaning, building toward something larger than the sum of its individual notes. Dr. Chen found himself leaning forward, studying her hands, her posture, her breathing. Everything about her playing spoke of serious classical training. This wasn't someone who had taken a few piano lessons as a child and remembered a tune or two. This was someone who had dedicated years to mastering one of the most demanding instruments. In classical music, the first major technical passage arrived, a series of rapid scales and arpeggios that separated amateur players from serious musicians. Maria approached it without hesitation, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and confidence. Not a single note was missed or rushed. The passage sparkled like crystal, each note distinct and clear despite the incredible speed. A few people in the crowd exchanged amazed glances. Mr. Thompson, who had initially felt sorry for Maria being put on the spot, now realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. His wife reached over and squeezed his arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. They had come to the reception expecting polite conversation and perhaps a few pleasant memories of the evening's concert. They certainly hadn't expected to discover a hidden musical genius working among the cleaning staff. The venue's manager, who had been hovering near the back of the room, pulled out his own phone and began recording. In his 15 years of working at Carnegie Hall, he had seen many remarkable performances, but never anything like this. He knew he was witnessing something that people would talk about for years to come. Maria seemed lost in the music now, her eyes focused on something beyond the keyboard, beyond the crowd, beyond the elegant reception hall. She was somewhere else, entirely in a place where only the music mattered. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her breathing synchronized with the phrases she was creating. This was a woman who had found her way home after a very long journey. The middle section of the ballade arrived with its contrasting gentle theme. Where the opening had been dramatic and powerful, This passage was tender and lyrical. Maria's touch on the keys became softer, more delicate, but no less precise. She shaped each phrase with the kind of musical sensitivity that usually took decades to develop. The melody sang out above the gentle accompaniment, like a voice telling secrets to the night. Dr. Chun was no longer thinking about the crowd, or the social situation, or even his own amazement. He was simply listening, the way he listened when he heard a recording by one of the great masters. Maria's interpretation was bringing new meaning to a piece he had heard hundreds of times. She was finding colors and emotions in the music that he had never noticed before. The technical demands of the piece continued to escalate, but Maria met each challenge without any sign of strain. Her years away from the piano seemed to melt away with each passing measure. Muscle memory, musical instinct, and pure talent were combining to create something magical. The room's acoustics, designed for the greatest performers in the world, carried her playing to every corner with perfect clarity. Some of the older guests began to recognize that they were witnessing something historically significant. Mrs. Peterson, a retired music teacher, whispered to her companion, "I've never heard anyone play that passage quite that way. She's making it sound like a conversation between two voices." The younger crowd members were beginning to understand that this wasn't just an amusing party trick. Several had tears in their eyes, moved by music in a way they hadn't expected. The combination of the beautiful piece, the unexpected performer, and the intimate setting was creating an emotional impact that none of them would ever forget. Maria's playing continued to build in intensity as the piece moved toward its dramatic climax. Her entire body was engaged now, her shoulders and arms working together to produce the powerful fortissimo passages that Chopin had written to showcase both technical skill and emotional depth. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend, its voice filling the room with sounds that seemed almost orchestral in their richness and complexity. Dr. Chun realized he was holding his breath. Whatever Maria's story was, whatever had brought her to this moment, she was proving beyond any doubt that true musical talent never really dies. It might hide, it might sleep, but when awakened, it could still astonish the world. As the piece entered its most challenging section, Maria's playing reached heights that left everyone speechless. Her fingers moved with impossible speed and accuracy through passages that would challenge even the most accomplished concert pianists. The complex runs and thunderous chords filled the reception hall with such power that the crystal chandeliers above seemed to tremble in response. Dr. Chun watched in complete amazement as she navigated through technical difficulties that he himself had spent months perfecting. But what struck him most wasn't just her flawless technique. It was the way she made every note sing with meaning. Each phrase told part of a larger story, building emotions that reached deep into the hearts of everyone listening. The crowd had grown completely still. Even the waiters had stopped moving, standing frozen with their trays as they listened to this incredible performance. Mrs. Henderson had tears streaming down her cheeks, though she seemed unaware of them. She had never heard Chopin played with such raw emotion and perfect technical control at the same time. Maria's entire body was now involved in creating the music. Her shoulders moved with the sweeping phrases, her back curved and straightened with the dynamics of loud and soft passages. She had become one with the instrument, channeling decades of suppressed musical passion into every note. The piano responded to her touch as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment, this player, this interpretation. The venue manager continued recording, his hands shaking slightly with excitement. He knew he was capturing something that would be talked about for years to come. In his experience, moments like this happen maybe once in a lifetime, if you were lucky. He had already started thinking about who he needed to call, what music directors needed to hear about what was happening. In their reception hall, Dr. Chun found himself studying Maria's technique with the eye of a professional. Her hand position was perfect, her fingering choices showed deep musical understanding, and her pedaling created exactly the right colors and textures for each section of the piece. This wasn't just natural talent at work. This was the result of serious, intensive training at the highest levels. As the music built toward its climactic peak, Maria's playing became even more intense. The dramatic chords rang out with such power that they seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Her left hand thundered through the bass passages while her right hand soared through the melody lines with breathtaking beauty. The combination created a wall of sound that enveloped everyone in the room. Some of the younger guests had begun crying without even understanding why. The music was reaching places in their hearts they hadn't known existed. This wasn't just a performance. They were witnessing. It was a revelation, a glimpse into what music could be when played by someone who truly understood its deepest meanings. The older music lovers in the crowd recognized they were hearing something extraordinary. Mr. Thompson, who had attended concerts for over 50 years, leaned over to his wife and whispered, "I've never heard anyone play with this much passion, not even the famous ones." His wife nodded, unable to speak, completely absorbed in the musical journey. Maria was taking them on. Maria herself seemed to be in another world entirely. Her eyes were closed now, her face showing the intense concentration and emotion that comes with performing at the highest level. She was no longer in a reception hall surrounded by surprised guests. She was back in the world where she belonged, where music was the only language that mattered. The technical demands of the piece continued to escalate, but Maria met each challenge with grace and power. Rapid scales flowed from her fingers like liquid silver. Complex chord progressions that would trip up most pianists sounded effortless under her hands. She made the impossible look easy, the way only true masters can. Dr. Chun realized his mouth was hanging open and quickly closed it. As a professional pianist, he understood better than anyone in the room just how difficult what Maria was doing really was. The piece she had chosen was not just technically challenging but emotionally demanding. It required the performer to bare their soul while maintaining perfect technical control. Very few pianists in the world could pull off both aspects simultaneously. The music reached its emotional peak, and Maria's playing became almost transcendent. Every note carried the weight of years of silence, decades of suppressed musical dreams, and a lifetime of love for an art form that had never really left her heart. The sound filled every corner of the reception hall, reaching into the souls of everyone present. Mrs. Peterson, the retired music teacher, was shaking her head in disbelief. She had taught piano for 40 years and had never encountered natural talent on this level. "That's not just playing," she whispered to herself. "That's channeling the spirit of Chopin himself." The dramatic climax arrived with crashing chords that seemed to make the entire room vibrate. Maria's hands moved across the keyboard with power and precision that left everyone breathless. The music built to heights that seemed impossible for a single instrument to produce. Yet somehow, under her touch, the piano became an entire orchestra, filling the space with rich, complex harmonies that surrounded and embraced everyone listening. As the piece began its descent from the climactic peak, Maria's playing took on an even deeper emotional quality. The music became more reflective, more personal, as if she was sharing her own story through Chopin's notes. The melody lines sang with a beauty that brought fresh tears to many eyes in the crowd. Dr. Chun found himself completely lost in the performance. His professional analysis had given way to pure emotional response. He was no longer thinking about technique or interpretation. He was simply feeling the music in his bones, the way it was meant to be felt. This was what had drawn him to music. In the first place, this ability to touch the human soul through organized sound. The younger guests were experiencing classical music in a way they never had before. Many of them had attended concerts out of social obligation or cultural expectation, but this performance was showing them what music could be when it came from the heart of someone who truly lived and breathed it. They were discovering that classical music wasn't just old-fashioned entertainment, but a living, breathing art form capable of moving people to their core. Maria's playing continued to weave its spell over the room. Each phrase was perfectly shaped, each dynamic change precisely controlled. She was creating a complete musical experience that engaged both the mind and the heart. The technical brilliance was serving the emotional content, not the other way around. This was what separated true artists from mere technicians. The reception hall had become a concert hall, and Maria had transformed from a cleaning lady into one of the finest pianists any of them had ever heard. The elegant surroundings, the crystal chandeliers, the polished marble floors, everything seemed to fade away except for the woman at the piano and the incredible music flowing from her fingers as the piece moved toward its conclusion. Everyone in the room sensed they were witnessing something that would change them forever. This wasn't just a surprise performance at a fancy reception. This was a moment of pure musical magic that proved talent and passion could emerge from the most unexpected places. The final section of the ballade arrived like a gentle sunset after a storm. Maria's hands moved through the concluding passages with a tenderness that made everyone hold their breath. The thunderous power of the climax gave way to something more intimate, more personal. Each note seemed to carry the weight of everything she had experienced in her life. Every dream deferred, every sacrifice made, the melody descended through the keyboard with heartbreaking beauty. Maria's touch became impossibly delicate, yet each note rang clear and true. She was telling the story's final chapter now, bringing all the emotional threads together into something that felt both complete and deeply meaningful. The music spoke of acceptance, of peace found after long struggle, of hope that had survived even the darkest times. Dr. Chun felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened to this conclusion. He had performed this piece himself many times, had heard it played by some of the world's greatest pianists, but never had he heard it communicate such raw human emotion. Maria wasn't just playing Chopin's notes. She was sharing her own heart through them, making the 150-year-old composition feel as fresh and immediate, as if it had been written yesterday. The crowd around the piano had grown to include everyone remaining at the reception. Even the security guards had quietly moved closer, drawn by the extraordinary sounds coming from the elegant room. Word had somehow spread to other parts of the building, and staff members who had finished their work were slipping in through the doorways to witness whatever was happening. Mrs. Henderson could no longer contain her emotions. She was openly weeping now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks, but she didn't care. In all her years of supporting the arts, attending galas and concerts and fundraisers, she had never experienced anything that moved her this deeply. This wasn't just entertainment or cultural refinement. This was art at its most pure and powerful, reaching across all social boundaries to touch the very core of human experience. As Maria played the final delicate phrases, something magical happened in the room. Every person present, regardless of their background or musical knowledge, understood that they were sharing in something sacred. The usual barriers between performer and audience, between different social classes, between stranger and stranger, had completely dissolved. They were all united in this moment by the universal language of music. The young guests who had started the evening thinking about their social media posts and weekend plans found themselves fundamentally changed by what they were experiencing. Many had never really listened to classical music before, had considered it boring and old-fashioned. But Maria's playing was showing them that great music transcended time and cultural boundaries, that it could speak directly to any human heart. Willing to listen, the venue's staff members were perhaps the most amazed of all. They had worked alongside Maria for years, sharing coffee breaks and casual conversations, never suspecting that she carried this incredible gift within her. The woman who quietly cleaned their workplace every night, who always had a kind word, and never complained about difficult tasks, was revealing herself to be one of the most gifted musicians any of them had ever encountered. Maria herself seemed to be pouring everything she had into these final moments. Her entire body was involved in creating the music, her breathing synchronized with the phrases, her posture reflecting the emotional content of each passage. She was completely absorbed in the performance, lost in a world where only the music mattered. The technical perfection never wavered, even as the emotional intensity reached its peak. Her fingers found every note with precision. Her pedaling created exactly the right resonances and colors. Her timing was absolutely flawless. This was the result of not just natural talent but years of dedicated training and practice that she had, somehow maintained even during her long absence from performing. Dr. Chen realized he was witnessing something that would change his own understanding of music. As a professional, he had always known that technical skill and musical expression needed to work together, but he had never heard them integrated so completely. Maria's playing was showing him new possibilities, new ways of approaching the pieces he thought he knew so well. The final chord approached, and everyone in the room sensed it coming. The musical journey that had taken them through storms of passion and moments of tender reflection was drawing to its close. Maria's hands moved toward the keyboard's lower register, preparing for the gentle conclusion that would bring this extraordinary experience to its end. When the last chord finally came, it was played with such perfect timing and touch that it seemed to hang in the air forever. The sound resonated through the reception hall, through the hearts of everyone listening, creating a moment of pure silence that felt like a prayer. Maria's hands remained on the keys for several seconds after the sound had faded, as if she was reluctant to break the spell that had been created. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in the room had ever experienced. It wasn't the awkward quiet that sometimes follows a performance when people aren't sure whether to applaud or not. This was the profound silence that comes after something sacred has occurred, when people need time to process what they have just witnessed. Maria slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard and sat back on the bench. She seemed surprised to find herself surrounded by all these people, as if she had forgotten where she was during the performance. Her eyes moved around the circle of faces, seeing expressions of amazement, tears of joy, and something approaching reverence. Dr. Chen was the first to move. He took a step forward, his own eyes bright with tears, and began to clap, but not the quick, enthusiastic applause that usually follows a good performance. This was slow, deliberate, respectful applause that acknowledged something extraordinary had just taken place. Mrs. Henderson joined in, then Mr. Thompson, then the younger guests. Soon the entire room was filled with applause, but it felt different from any ovation any of them had ever given before. This wasn't just appreciation for technical skill or even musical beauty. This was recognition of something deeper, something that had touched their souls and changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The applause continued for what felt like forever, growing in intensity as people realized they needed to express their gratitude for what Maria had shared with them. She sat at the piano bench, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the response. Her hands folded in her lap, her cheeks flushed with emotion and perhaps embarrassment at being the center of so much attention. But as the applause went on, something shifted in her expression. The surprise and embarrassment gave way to something else, a kind of recognition that she had just reclaimed, something precious that had been lost for too long. She had remembered who she really was beneath the uniform and the quiet demeanor. She had found her way back to the part of herself that had never really died, just waited patiently for the right moment to emerge. The ovation finally began to fade, but the magic in the room remained. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something that would become a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. As the applause finally died down, Dr. Chen approached Maria with slow, respectful steps. His entire understanding of the evening had been turned upside down. The woman he had casually challenged to play the piano was clearly no ordinary person. The level of skill and artistry he had just witnessed didn't come from nowhere. There was a story here, and he needed to understand it. "Maria," he said softly, his voice filled with genuine awe, "that was absolutely incredible. I've never heard that piece played with such passion and technical perfection. You're not just someone who knows how to play piano. You're a serious musician, a real artist." Maria looked up at him, her eyes still bright with the emotions that had poured out through her performance. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. The transformation from invisible cleaning lady to celebrated performer was happening so quickly that she appeared almost dizzy with the change. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I haven't played for anyone in so long, I wasn't sure I still could." Mrs. Henderson had composed herself enough to approach as well, though her eyes were still red from crying. My dear, she said, reaching out to take Maria's hands. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in this building, and I've been coming here for 30 years. You have an extraordinary gift. How in the world did you end up working as... She paused, realizing how her words might sound. As a cleaning lady, Maria finished with a small, sad smile. It's a long story. Dr. Chun pulled up a chair from a nearby table and sat down beside the piano bench. The remaining crowd had formed a respectful circle around them, everyone sensing that they were about to hear something important. The venue manager had stopped recording, but remained close enough to listen, his phone still ready in case this conversation proved as remarkable as the performance. We have time, Dr. Chun said gently. I think everyone here would love to hear your story if you're willing to share it. Maria looked around at all the faces watching her with such genuine interest and kindness. These were people who had just witnessed her bare her soul through music, and their responses had been nothing but appreciation and respect. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to talk about the life she had left behind. I was born in a small town where music was everything to my family, she began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. My grandmother was a piano teacher, my mother played violin, and my father conducted the local church choir. I was playing piano before I could properly reach the pedals. She paused, looking down at her hands that still rested on the piano keys. By the time I was 8, it was clear that I had something special. My parents sacrificed everything to get me the best teachers they could find. When I was 16, I auditioned for the most prestigious music school in the country and received a full scholarship. The crowd listened in complete silence, hanging on every word. This was the backstory they had sensed behind her incredible performance, the explanation for skills that had seemed to come from nowhere. The school was like a dream come true, Maria continued, her eyes growing distant with memory. I studied with the best teachers, practiced 8 hours a day, and prepared for a career as a concert pianist. My professors said I had the potential to play with the world's greatest orchestras. Everything was going exactly as planned. Dr. Chun leaned forward, already sensing that this story was heading toward tragedy. In his experience, when talented musicians ended up in unexpected places, there was usually heartbreak involved. What happened? He asked softly. Maria's expression grew sadder, but she continued with quiet strength. During my final year at school, my father had a massive heart attack. He survived, but he couldn't work anymore. At the same time, my mother was diagnosed with a rare illness that required expensive treatments not covered by insurance. And my younger brother, who had special needs, was struggling in school and needed constant care. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place for everyone listening. Mrs. Henderson's hand went to her heart, already understanding the sacrifice that was coming. I was supposed to graduate and begin touring with a chamber music group that summer, Maria said, her voice becoming quieter. It was the opportunity I had worked toward my entire life. But my family needed me more than I needed my dreams. She looked up at Dr. Chung, and he could see decades of suppressed pain in her eyes. So I left school 3 months before graduation and moved back home. I got a job at a factory during the day and gave piano lessons in the evenings to help pay for my mother's medical bills and my father's medications. The room remained completely silent. Even the traffic noise from outside seemed to have faded away as everyone absorbed the weight of what she was telling them. For 5 years, I kept thinking it was temporary, Maria continued. I thought I could take care of my family and then somehow find my way back to music. But my mother's condition got worse, my father needed more help, and my brother required special schooling that cost more than I was making. Dr. Chen felt his heart breaking for this woman who had given up everything for her family. He had known other musicians who had faced similar choices, but few had shown the selfless courage that Maria had displayed. The piano lessons helped for a while, she said. At least I was still touching music, still sharing it with others. But when my mother died 7 years later, I discovered she had been hiding how bad our financial situation really was. There were debts I didn't know about, medical bills that had been piling up. I had to sell our family piano just to keep the house. Several people in the crowd wiped away tears at this revelation. The idea of a pianist having to sell their instrument was heartbreaking enough, but knowing it was the family piano that had started her musical journey made it even more tragic. After that, music became too painful, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every time I heard a piano, it reminded me of everything I had lost. So I stopped listening, stopped playing, stopped thinking about the life I might have had. She gestured around the elegant reception hall. When I moved to the city 15 years ago, I needed work that would pay enough to support my father, and brother, Carnegie Hall was hiring for their cleaning crew, and the pay was better than most places. I thought working around music might be torture, but I was wrong. Being near these instruments, hearing these performances, it was like staying connected to a part of myself I thought was dead. Dr. Chun understood now why she had been so careful with the piano, why she had seemed to understand its true nature. She hadn't just been cleaning an instrument. She had been caring for an old friend. During my late shifts, when the halls were empty, I would sometimes touch the keys, Maria admitted. Just a few notes here and there, quietly, so no one would hear. I told myself I was just checking that they were clean, but really I was trying to remember who I used to be. The story was complete now, and everyone understood the full magnitude of what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a talented person playing piano. This was someone reclaiming a piece of their soul that had been buried under 25 years of sacrifice and responsibility. Dr. Chun sat in stunned silence for several moments after Maria finished her story. His mind was racing, trying to process everything he had just heard. Here was a woman who possessed the kind of musical talent that appeared maybe once in a generation. And she had been hidden away for 25 years, cleaning the very halls where she should have been performing as a featured artist. Maria, he said finally, his voice filled with emotion and determination, what you just shared with us, what you just played for us, this can't be the end of your story. Your talent is too extraordinary to remain hidden. Your music is too powerful to keep locked away. Maria shook her head gently, though there was a spark of something hope, perhaps, in her eyes. Dr. Chun, that's very kind of you to say, but I'm 51 years old. The music world doesn't have room for pianists who start their careers at my age. Those days are behind me now. But Dr. Chun was already formulating a plan. In his 20 years as a professional musician, he had built relationships with conductors, music directors, agents, and venue managers all over the world. More importantly, he understood that what he had just witnessed wasn't just talent. It was artistry of the highest order, and true artistry was ageless. You're wrong about that, he said with growing excitement. Yes, the classical music world can be difficult and competitive. But what you have is so rare, so special, that age becomes irrelevant. I've performed with pianists in their 70s who were just hitting their artistic peak. Music isn't a young person's game, it's a passionate person's calling. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her face still showing traces of the tears she had shed during Maria's performance. Dr. Chun is absolutely right, dear. What we just experienced was extraordinary. I've been a patron of the arts for most of my adult life, and I can tell you that performances like yours don't come along often. The music world needs what you have to offer. The venue manager, who had been quietly listening to the entire conversation, finally spoke up. Maria, I've worked at Carnegie Hall for 15 years. I've seen some of the greatest musicians in the world perform on our stages. What you just did ranks among the most powerful performances I've ever witnessed, anywhere. Dr. Chun stood up, his excitement building as the possibilities became clearer in his mind. I want to make some calls. I have a friend who's the artistic director of the symphony orchestra downtown. They're always looking for exceptional soloists. And I know several agents who specialize in discovering mature artists who are ready to share their gifts with the world. Maria looked overwhelmed by the sudden attention and offers of help. For 25 years, she had lived with the belief that her musical dreams were permanently buried. The idea that they might somehow be resurrected seemed almost too good to be true, but I haven't performed professionally in decades, she protested. I don't have professional recordings or press materials or any of the things that real concert pianists need. I'm just a woman who cleans buildings and plays piano in empty halls when no one is listening." Dr. Chun smiled at her concerns. "Those are just logistics, Maria. They're problems that can be solved. What can't be taught or manufactured is what? You have genuine musical genius combined with life experience that gives your playing incredible emotional depth. That's what makes an artist truly great." The young guests who had recorded parts of her performance were already sharing the videos with friends and family. One of them, a music student at a local university, approached Maria with tears still fresh in her eyes. "Miss Maria," she said, "I've been studying piano for 12 years, and I've never heard anything like what you just played. You made me understand why I fell in love with music in the first place. Please don't let this be the only time we get to hear you play." More people began stepping forward with offers of help and encouragement. Mrs. Henderson immediately volunteered to provide financial support for any recordings or promotional materials Maria might need. Mr. Thompson offered connections in the business world who might be interested in sponsoring a comeback tour. Even the security guards and cleaning staff who had gathered to listen spoke up with their own words of support and amazement. Maria was clearly struggling to believe that all of this was really happening. She kept looking around the room as if expecting to wake up and find herself alone with her cleaning supplies. The performance and the crowd's reaction, all just a beautiful dream. Dr. Chun could see her uncertainty and decided to make a concrete offer. "Maria, my management team is organizing a benefit concert next month for music education programs. We need a second featured performer. The venue seats 2,000 people, and it will be recorded for broadcast. Would you consider performing with us?" The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. This was the moment that would determine whether Maria's return to music would actually happen or remain just a beautiful possibility. Maria looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created magic on the piano keys. She thought about her father, who had passed away 3 years earlier, and how proud he would have been to see her playing again. She thought about her mother, who had always believed in her talent even when money was tight and sacrifices had to be made. She thought about her brother, who was now living independently and no longer needed her constant care. For the first time in 25 years, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to walk onto a stage as a featured performer rather than the person who cleaned up afterward. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I've been away from this world for so long. What if I've forgotten how to be a real musician? What if tonight was just a fluke?" Dr. Chun knelt down beside the piano bench so he could look directly into her eyes. "Maria, what happened here tonight wasn't a fluke. It was the result of talent, training, and passion that never died, even when they had to sleep for a while. You didn't forget how to be a musician because it's not something you do, it's something you are." The encouragement from everyone in the room was overwhelming. These strangers had become believers in her story, supporters of her dreams, and witnesses to her incredible talent. They were offering her something she had thought was lost forever, a second chance to be who she was meant to be. Maria took a deep breath and looked around at all the hopeful faces surrounding her. Then she turned back to Dr. Chun and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I would like to perform with you." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands together with joy. The young guests started taking selfies to commemorate the moment they had witnessed someone's dreams come back to life. The venue manager was already making mental notes about how to document this incredible story for the hall's archives. 6 months later, Maria walked onto the stage at Carnegie Hall wearing an elegant black gown instead of a cleaning uniform. The same piano she had dusted countless times now waited for her as a featured performer. As she sat down at the bench and placed her hands on the keys, she looked out at the audience and saw Dr. Chun in the front row, smiling with pride and anticipation. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade rang out clear and true, just as they had that magical night in the reception hall. But this time, Maria wasn't surprised by her own talent. She had reclaimed her identity as an artist, and she was finally home where she belonged.